I'm sure many of you here know there are things that are going on which we are simply not told about. There are things flying around. There are very likely intelligences that are doing more than we know, moving amongst us. And yet we are told not to take this seriously. It's increasingly sort of pushed to the fringes, and if you believe that, you're some kind of nutcase. Well, anybody that looks at the evidence can see there is a case to be made. And what these gentlemen have been doing is keeping databases, keeping records of this evidence and trying to share it with people. And that's what we're going to hear today. We're going to hear a lot of their findings, and we'll begin to understand even more that there is a whole other world out there, and maybe others too. So a big hand for the Swansea UFO Network.
Well, thank you for that intro. Good morning. Yeah, this is half fulfilling a dream for me because I play in a band back home and I wanted to stand on a stage and say, "Hello, Glastonbury!" But anyway, good morning. Welcome to the annual Symposium. Now, you're going to hear a lot of speakers over the next few days, and they'll be discussing a wide variety of subjects. But firstly, I'd like to thank the organisers for their continued hard work in putting together such an incredible production and of alternative themed topics. So thank you very much for that. Anyway, my name's Steve Drewson, and I'm a founding member of Swansea UFO Network, or SUFON as it's locally termed. I'm accompanied today by co-founder Mr. Emlyn Williams and our technical director Mr. Mike Maunder, who's secretly hoping that nothing goes wrong. And we'll be discussing today the prodigious subject of UFOs. Now, firstly, apologise for not wearing a tinfoil hat and an anorak, but it is hot in here, you can understand. Now, we often give talks to the uninitiated about the history of UFOs and how sightings can be traced back as early as 1504 BC to Egypt. And there's dozens of other recorded sightings that occurred right through time and back through the Middle Ages. But I'm sure most of you are probably all aware of that already. So today we'll be looking at sightings that have occurred in the Wales area, and predominantly South Wales, which, as you've probably guessed, that's where we're from. In particular, we'll be looking at the evening and the night of Wednesday, the 19th of January, 1983. Now, that saw the occurrence of what Emlyn, Mike, and myself have dubbed the Night of the Triangles. Now, this took place over Swansea and its surrounding area, and it actually has to be one of the most prolific mass UFO sightings that has occurred in Great Britain. But why haven't you heard about it? Well, you know the press, don't you? Now, there were a host of separate reports to the police and the media of very large, silent, triangular-shaped crafts moving slowly across the sky over various parts of the city. We've managed to track down quite a few of these witnesses and recorded, and in some cases, we've videoed their testimonies. And among the witnesses are 2 senior police officers who were detectives, a football team, many other bona fide members of the public. And there were, in fact, literally dozens of unconnected independent witnesses to the night's occurrences, which clearly revealed that there were multiple crafts involved. Now, unfortunately, as it was, some 35 years ago now, a few of the older witnesses have passed away, others have moved out the area, and we cannot trace them. However, we have managed to contact and interview quite a large number of them, and that process is still ongoing. Now, I don't intend to stand up here and spend the short 1-hour slot we have trying to convince you about the existence of UFOs. Now, having investigated the phenomena for, many, many years, and I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds of people, I've no doubt in my mind that it is a very real phenomenon. So I'll just very briefly tell you a little bit about Swansea UFO Network and how it came to be formed, and then we can get on with what's more important, and that's allowing you to be privy to some of our witness interviews, especially those involved in what I previously referred to as the Night of the Triangles. It was about 1 a.m. on a hot summer's morning, and I had my own sighting of a UFO in the Caswell Bay area of Swansea. I don't know if you're familiar, that's the Gower Coast. There'd been a road accident at the bottom of this hill, and I blocked the top off. The reason being, I was on duty as a police traffic officer, and I went on to complete 30 years service. Now, I'd love to tell you that I saw a huge spinning craft with lights all over it, and it wasn't that, though. It was a stationary, bright, white light up in the sky, about the height of a jet, so we're talking, what, 39,000 feet, something like that, but extremely bright, much brighter than a star. And myself and my colleague were watching this for quite some considerable time. And then all of a sudden, you know the speed a jet moves at, it just moves slowly across the sky. Well, this just went, gone, just like that. It was instant. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So what should I have done? Reported it? To whom? The police? I was the police. If I'd have reported it, I'd inevitably been subject to the ridicule that everybody else gets when they report something. So I'd have been the subject of derision. So, like everybody else's sightings, it went unreported. Now, my intense interest in the subject didn't really start till I retired from the police force, and with the advent of the internet, I began to research the subject in a lot more detail. And to that end, I decided it may be worthy of attending a local club meeting on the subject. So I looked around to see what clubs were available, and there weren't any in the area. There had been a few, but they'd all closed down. So I was left with the only alternative, and that was to start a club myself. And to that end, I started, well, a Facebook page, if you like. Well, within a day, I was contacted by Mr. Emlyn Williams, who's on my right there, who I will speak to shortly. And he resided very close to me, and the funny thing was, he was doing exactly the same thing, setting up a Facebook page the same time as I was doing mine. Anyway, he contacted me, we got together, and it went on from there. Now, Emlyn has an immense interest in the subject, and he has since childhood. And that was a long time ago. He's a great ambassador for the club, as others here are as well. Now, he's amassed a huge library of books and magazines on the subject, and he's compiled a massive record of local sightings, having spent hours and hours of painstaking work at the libraries, going back over newspapers and publications as far back as they first started. The task's still ongoing, but he's now ably assisted by other members of the club. Now, the purpose of the club is to educate and stimulate discussion on the subject and its many offshoots, and to investigate sightings, both old and new. And in addition to the Facebook page, there's also an internet site, www.sufon.co.uk. And that allows visitors to explore in details and photographs of local sightings, and find out what's happening within our club, and also report any sightings they may have had themselves. We've been operating for over 4 years now, and we hold regular monthly meetings, which are very well attended by, I know, plus 40 to 60 people every month, which is probably one of the best attended clubs in Britain. And our members come from various backgrounds. They're not just Joe Blogs. A lot of them are doctors, philosophers, police officers, authors, computer experts. The list goes on. Now, a lot of these people have themselves had strange sightings over the years, and perhaps they've never felt able to share their stories for fear of ridicule, perhaps by their employers or their families or just their peers. So if you like, the club's acted like an AA meeting, providing a sort of anonymous safe haven for people to come along and outline their sightings to other members who've had similar experiences. And many have described their feeling of relief, having unburdened themselves of something they've carried with them, perhaps for many, many years. And we found that on many occasions. And we've also got the facility for hypnotic regression if it's required or requested. And at our meeting nights, we normally provide an illustrated talk, like you're getting today, hosted by a guest speaker, followed by an open forum where the audience can pose questions and share experiences. Now, the subject matter is not just confined to UFOs. We have meetings about crop circles, ley lines, Egyptian pyramids, Bermuda Triangle, secret underground facilities, the possibility of alien existence, alleged alien abductions, of which in our area there seem to be an awful lot, men in black, animal mutilations, sleep paralysis, also ghosts and psychic phenomena. The list is endless, what may or may not be connected with the subject of UFOs. We've had the pleasure of playing host to many famous names in the field of UFOs, and you'll be seeing a few of them over the next couple of days as well. We've probably got well over 1,500 reported sightings on record at the moment in our area. We regularly host sky watches in areas where there's been unusual sightings or other areas that are free of light pollution. And during those sky watches, we have observed quite a little bit of unusual phenomena. It's also given ourselves the opportunity to familiarize ourselves with natural phenomena, such as the latest thing, which is Chinese lanterns, satellites, meteors, the International Space Station, iridium flares, stars, planets, and many of which are obviously mistaken for unexplained phenomena. I think I've said enough anyway, because what you want to do is listen to these guys with me. So thank you for listening to me, but let's get down to what's more important. That's examining the sightings from our own particular area. And to that end, I'll hand you over to Mr. Emlyn Williams. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Hello, everybody. It's nice to be in Glastonbury. I sing in a choir, so like Steve, hello, Glastonbury. How Welsh, singing in a middle voice choir, right? Yeah, as Steve said, we've listed a lot of sightings from the Wales area, going back to I think the earliest one we've got on our database is 16 something from North Wales. But anyway, tonight, as we've only got an hour, we're just going to look at one particular incident, which was what we call the Night of the Triangles. So, horrible picture of me there when I'd lost a bit of weight since then, thankfully. But yeah, as Steve said, we get out into the public as much as we can because we want to tell the world that we're here so that people who have experienced things can come to tell us. And I think it's very important that human stories get documented before, because we're all mortals and a lot of the witnesses are now passed away. So it's good to get their stories documented before people leave us. Okay, so Night of the Triangles. Now, the Night of the Triangles occurred in an area, the sightings we've documented come from Cardiff, up the valleys, Merthyr Tydfil, the Vale of Glamorgan and Porthcawl, Neath, Port Talbot, and particularly Swansea. And many of the sightings, well, all the sightings we're going to talk about tonight really, mostly in Swansea. We've listed over 40 separate sightings from one evening, from about 5 p.m. up to about 7 or 8 p.m. Those are the ones we know about. It's very much the tip of the iceberg. And because a lot of cases, a lot of UFO reports are not reported. A lot of sightings are not reported because, as Steve said earlier, who do people report them to? So we've got 40 separate sightings in one evening, and we've listed about over 100 individual witnesses, some singly on their own, some with a group of other people, and some are actually were members of a football team. The craft flew over and the coach stopped the game, and they were all standing there looking up at it. Also a primary school in Cardiff. We've got reference to Eglwys Swen Primary School in Whitchurch in Cardiff, where children and teachers saw something. But further than that, I can't tell you because we don't know the details to that. Okay. If anybody's not familiar where Swansea is, it's at the base of the Gower Peninsula. There's the Gower Peninsula. You see Swansea there on the right-hand side. It's Wales's second city. Population since the Gower Peninsula itself became part of the city limits, about 300,000 people. So not a huge city, but a lot of people. And what I have found is that you tend to get more UFO reports from urban areas, obviously because there's more people living there. There's more people to see the things. Part of what we do is we get in the local press, we got the radio station, local radio, appealing to the public for witnesses. And much of this Night of the Triangles witnesses have come from that source, so it's a very useful thing that we do. So the Night of the Triangles, 19th of January 1983, a long time ago now. It was a cold night, clear, unusually for Swansea. No rain, nice clear sky, stars in the sky. And the first I got to hear about it was newspaper reports. This was from the South Wales Evening Post, a local paper in Swansea, and it says hundreds spot mystery lights over the city. Meteorites, say the Coast Guards. Why is it newspapers always go to the experts for their opinion? And very often the experts don't know the full facts, so they say, oh, what they probably saw was meteors. Okay. Following night in the Evening Post, meteors? Never, say all the UFO spotters, of which there are many, and many had actually contacted the Evening Post at the time, especially after the first night's article. Many more wrote in or phoned up to say, oh, I saw that as well. One of which was a lady called June Thomas, and she actually drew a nice little drawing of what she saw there, which appeared in the paper. This is Cardiff. This is in the South Wales Echo. A lady called Carol Griffiths was driving in a car, and she did a drawing as well of a triangle in company with other people in the car who saw it. UFOs, it's not us, say RAF, rescue flight. Because at the time, one of the theories was that what people were seeing were RAF planes refueling in flight, with one plane in front of the other, you know, where they refuel the plane behind through a hose. Well, to do that over an urban area at low altitude is just not on, so that can be discounted as well. That triangle is no plane. Expert. That's nice for an expert to say that, isn't it? If it's not a plane, what can it be? UFO. Cosmos. Now, that particular evening, there was a Russian satellite called Cosmos was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere somewhere. And again, that was put down as a possible explanation for what people had seen. Or was it the RAF Hercules, which was being refueled in flight? Again, talking about the meteor UFO theory, that's repeated. That was in the Western Mail. And a probe into UFO reports in South Wales later on. The Ministry of Defence were consulted. So, who were the witnesses? On the timeline that we've created, the first sighting was 5:15. The Evening Post actually recorded it as 5:45, but having spoken to the witness recently, she said, no, it was at 5:15. This is the BP oil refinery in Llandarcy, as it was in 1973, and that's not there anymore. There's a housing estate being built there now. And like many of the old heavy industries of South Wales, it's disappeared. But 2 miles north of the refinery is a village called Skewin, which is on the western edge of Neath, situated between Neath and Swansea. And a young girl called Leanne Gaskins was 14 years old. She'd just come home from school. And their house was on the side of a hill, and their kitchen with the dining room was actually on the first floor because it was on the side of a hill. And I'll just read you what her testimony that she told us. It was 5:15 p.m. and not 5:45, as reported in the newspaper. She remembers the time because Blue Peter had just started on the TV. Isn't it funny, little details of that? People can remember what was on the TV, just to time it. Her home at the time was in Lucy Road on the west side of Skewin. Her mother was preparing the family tea in the kitchen, which adjoined the dining room. Leanne was telling her about a school trip she had been on that day, and she was leaning on the windowsill looking out towards Skewin Dog Track. There was a racing track between her house and the refinery. It was dark early, being January, and over Kilvey Hill, which is a large hill on the edge of Swansea, you can see it from, it's quite an imposing landmark, and it's got a radio mast on the top. Over Kilver Hill in the distance, to her right, she saw, apart from the normal red light on the top of the TV mast, a group of lights. The lights were flashing or pulsing different colours. She remembers green, amber, yellow, red, and white, and changing constantly. It was positioned above the transmitter mast and was stationary for a while. It then moved fast and suddenly to the right and stopped for a few seconds. So it would have been over the Swansea city centre by her factor in from where it was in the sky. It then flicked instantly back to the left to its position over Kilver Hill in a jerky manner. Then back to the right again, but not as far. And it then went back over Kilver Hill again, but offset to the left of it. It stopped here for another short time. She said its movements were instant and quick, with no acceleration. Leanne told her mother to come and see it, but she was busy making the tea. Then the object suddenly shot off instantly to a new position towards the left and just above the cooling towers of the BP Llandasi oil refinery. So it covered a distance of about 5 miles instantly. She could then see how big the object was. It was, and its shape. She said it was triangular, with lights all over it, pulsing randomly in different colours. She could see the body of the craft due to it being nighttime and its distance away from her. But the lights suggested its shape. It was very big and seemed to cover the whole refinery. You can see from that photograph the refinery is big. Her parents, Martin and Margaret, and her sister Kerry, then came for a look. By this time, Leanne was hanging out the window. She was so excited. Her father worked at the refinery and wondered if he should tell anybody. Because out of the row of houses where they lived, about 5 or 8 men actually worked at the refinery. And the object stayed in position over the refinery for about 5 minutes, and then it moved up slowly a little, and then shot up vertically into the sky, out of sight, in a blink. And throughout the entire sighting, which lasted 12 to 15 minutes, no sound was noticed apart from the drone of the nearby A48 dual carriageway. So the next witness we spoke to also saw something over the refinery, but from a few miles further east, and again in Neath, and his name is Simon Matthews. He lived in Leros Park in Neath. He was 12 years old at the time. He was outside his home in Daphne Road on his BMX bike. And we've got a little video here so he can tell you in his own words.
As I say, I was 12 at the time. I'm 47 now. At the time, I was living in 31 Daphne Road, which is this house here on the corner. And at the time I lived there, there was no hedge row around the house. It was just the pavement straight onto the grass. I was out playing on my BMX, right on the corner there, right by the pavement on my BMX. And it was already gone dark. It was pitch dark, even though it was early evening, but because it was January, it was dark. I rolled my bike over towards the corner of the street here, between Daphne Close and Daphne Road. And BP Llandasi oil refineries on the top of the hill there, the top of the A465. And I could see 2 triangular craft hovering above the works. The 2 triangular craft were consisted of 6 red lights in total. So there's 3 red lights on each triangular craft, on each of the corners of the triangle. I just put my glasses down. And the craft was sort of moving slowly over the works and sort of giving it that sort of motion, almost as though they were scanning the area below them. And I watched it. I was startled. I immediately knew something strange was happening. I knew I was witnessing something amazing. Didn't know what it was, but I knew it was something strange going on. I watched it for a short while, and then I ran into my house around the back door into the kitchen, and I shouted, Mum, come and look at this with me. There's UFOs above BP. And she wouldn't come out. She was cleaning or doing some of the housework like she was always doing. And she wouldn't come with me, and I begged her to come out, but she wouldn't come out. But anyway, I came back out, and I watched them for a bit. I can't remember what happened then, but I skipped forward a day, and then the next day, on the front page of the Evening Post, was this story, 100 spot mystery lights over city. And I showed that story to my mother, and she couldn't believe it. She couldn't believe, the story, and she regretted so much not coming out to see the lights with me, to see the craft with me. So that's pretty much the story, really.
You came up here last week and you took a photograph, and you've made a mock-up.
No, I actually took video. I set my tripod up there, took a video of the same view.
And you've made a CGI reconstruction of it.
Yeah.
And here it is. It's quite a few miles away, but it's another perspective of...
Yeah. How many miles would you say that is, It's about 2 point something miles, I think.
Yeah, it's about 2 to 3 miles, I reckon.
Yeah.
2 or 3 miles.
But, it shows how large they must have been, because I could clearly see them. I could clearly see these
Well,
craft.
you're the first witness that we tracked down outside Swansea,
Right.
apart from
It's incredible.
one in Skewin, which is sort of borderline
It's
Swansea.
incredible, because look how much sky you can see.
So, it's very nice of him to come out to be videoed, because a lot of people wouldn't do that, for obviously reasons, fear of ridicule, things like that. But it's interesting that his description and his little reconstruction that he made himself is very different to what Leanne Gaskins saw. So we think it was a different time in the evening, that he actually saw something, 2 craft, whereas Leanne Gaskins actually saw one huge one. Steve mentioned earlier about 2 police detective officers, and this is one of them. This is Mike Troke. Now, at one point in the evening, Mike Troke was a detective sergeant, and he was in the company of Detective Constable Gethin James. They were based at Morriston Police Station, and they were calling on a house where there'd been a spate of burglaries in the Trallwn area, which is on the east side of the city, not far from Skewin, actually. And they'd just gone up the steps to knock on the door, and they turned, and they saw, coming across the valley, a huge, not a triangle this time, but a huge rectangular object. And that's Mike's drawing of it there. The front was blunt, and there were 2 blue triangular shapes at the back. And he said it was the size of a couple of football pitches in size, and it was heading towards them. And from about a mile away, it suddenly turned to their left and headed south and headed off over Swansea Bay. Now, we will hopefully be videoing an interview with Mike and Gethin, the other police officer, who are now both retired, by the way, shortly. So it'd be nice to get them together so they can compare notes. The next witness is no longer with us, unfortunately. He's a gentleman by the name of Orllwyn Jones. That's a good Welsh name, isn't it? Orllwyn Jones. And this is his son, Phil Jones. Now, Orllwyn Jones saw a craft that night, and it affected him so much he didn't want to tell the public. He was excuse me, I'll get some water. He worked as a driving instructor, and he was just leaving his house in Long Oaks Avenue in the uplands area of Swansea, not far from the city centre, at 6:15, and what he saw, he told his family afterwards, and Phil actually waited to make it public until his father had passed away, and but he felt it was important enough that he wanted to get it out there. So I managed to track him down, because he put his post up on a website, a UFO website, listing sightings, and all he said was his name was Phil Jones. So I had a hell of a time trying to track him down, believe me. In Swansea, a guy called Jones. Yeah, there's 1 or 2. Yeah. Anyway, we found him, and he came out of his family's house. He still actually lives in the family home, and basically his father was just leaving the house to go and pick up a client to do a driving lesson. And that's enough from me. Let's hear from Phil. That's the view of the street as it would have looked in 1983.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as I say, my father alighted the property. He was going on to a driving lesson. as he got down to his car here, he noticed his attention was drawn to the roofs of the two houses next door but one, from which he saw a large black craft. It was he described it as being about the size of a family saloon car, triangular in shape. It was blacker than the night sky, and then on the three corners of this craft was a small pole, and then at the bottom of that pole was a very bright, small but very bright white light. The vehicle or the craft came between the two houses here. It then descended below the height of the house at a walking pace. It crossed the road and then ascended back up on several phases. It came up on 2 or 3 phases and just about managed to miss the roof of the house opposite.
Which roof was it?
Number 15.
15. So
That's right, that one there next to the scaffolding.
The
Yeah,
black roof.
yeah,
Oh, right.
yeah. As he said, it was that close. He was waiting for the impact to occur. He really did think it was going to crash.
Was there any sound?
It made a sound. It was a very low chook, 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 chook type sound.
Chugging.
Like a chugging sound. It was going at what he described as a slow walking pace, and was so narrow, or indeed so low, it had no height to it as such. He said although it was intelligently controlled, and certainly it was under control, if there was any entity, anything in there, it would have had to have been laying prostrate, and it would have certainly probably not a human being. It was that thin.
So you say it was about, what size was that?
About the size of a family saloon car.
About the size of a family saloon car?
Yeah, a regular family car. So.
When you say it was a triangle shape, what was it, like a equilateral triangle? Or was it?
Yes, it was, yeah. As I said, several people were reported as having seen these aircraft in the night sky on that particular night in question, but this is the closest that I'm aware of.
There's one I've heard that it is the lowest that I've heard of. Yeah. So you can imagine it coming over the roof there.
Sure.
Have a quick scan up again.
In this direction, as I say, it descended. It actually came down below the height of the roof. How long would it take? 5-6 seconds to cross the road at a walking pace?
Yeah.
And then, as I say, it then ascended again, just about cleared that roof, literally by an inch or two. And then my father, having run up here, between the gap in the two houses, he noticed it descending again and making its way down there.
Well, when it actually left, did it leave at velocity, or did it just disappear?
Well, my father lost sight of it between these houses. It didn't speed up. The speed was constant. It was a constant, what he described as a slow to medium walking pace. And that's how it ascended over that roof. He ran over here, saw between the two houses the gap there. He managed to watch it descend back down below the house level again and head off in that direction towards the Swansea Bay. And as I say, he said that as far as he was concerned, the speed was continually, it was the same speed.
I wonder if there was any sound coming from that thing.
Well, the only sound that he could hear was a very low, deep, and I'll do it for you, it was a sort of a chook, 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 chook sound.
So where were you at the time? Okay, yeah, good. I'm glad to stop because we were just repeating it then, right? The next witness was actually located 2 streets down from Orthloyn Jones. And there's this lady here called Natalie Bowden. She's standing outside the house where she was living then. And this is Beechwood Road in the Uplands. And she was about 13 years old. Again, she'd just come home from school, watching TV. And she suddenly had a notion to go outside. And I won't go into detail because, again, we got a little interview with her here. And she goes into quite a lot of detail. But she comes up with a few really interesting observations. She seems to have had missing time. She's got a bald patch on her head. Going to go through the pictures there. She's actually outside the house. This is the view of the house. This is a drawing that she did. we'll go into detail in again. But basically, she can remember what she called a circle of light underneath some huge craft. That's what the drawing was. She didn't know what shape the craft was or how big it was, but it was big because she can't remember seeing the edges. Then she noticed that she had a bald patch with a raised lump, which she still has to this day. Okay, should we see the video? Yeah.
Just for the record, one record, this is not to convince anyone. This is, my story for me. I don't need to convince anyone, okay? So, in this house, I was 13. I was sitting in the back room, which is next to the kitchen in the annex. And one evening, I was sitting with my dog watching TV, and I just had an urge to get up and go out, and don't know why. But come through the house, the dog doesn't follow me. Through the camera? Mm-hmm. Okay. So.
Well, talk to me on the camera.
Okay. So I came out from the back room, just came out to the front and stood on this step by here. And in the sky, 30 feet above that house over there, is a massive UFO. The central part of it is, as I said before, it was a stadium shaped, but the windows were like this size, but there was a lot of lights, and I caught the lights were creams and ochres and pinks and all soft kind of colours, and they were all different. I thought it was trying to say something to me in my in my head, but I was also standing here thinking, well, what's it doing there? I didn't see the circumference of it because it was immense. It was a black sky, but all I was focusing on was the lights underneath. So I'm looking at it, wondering why it's there. For 5 minutes, I'm standing here wondering whether it needs the water in the park. I'm trying to make sense of what I'm seeing and logically explain it in my own head. So I couldn't make any sense of it. And then I thought, people think I'm going to be a nutter, so I better go. So I started screaming into the house to call my brother, my sister, and my stepfather. So they came out, and because I was causing so much commotion, the neighbours in the street had come out. So they said 2 across there, 2 up here, 1 across the... So basically in the end there was about 9, 10 of us looking at this thing. The other thing is that it wasn't cold anymore. The sound in the street, it felt like a pin could have dropped. You could hear a pin drop. It was that kind of, just stillness, complete stillness. No sound out of this thing that's there. But when my stepfather and my sister finally come out, they stand on where you 2 are, and they're looking at it, and I'm like, can you believe it? It's a UFO, and he was like, wow, yeah, UFO, but no excitement or interest at all, just kind of like a dull, oh yeah, UFO. I'll put it at this point, my stepfather and my sister didn't get along. I'm doing this to set the scene because it's not normal what they did next. He walked in, and I said, what are you doing? And he's like, I've seen enough. So he steps down, mechanically, but fluidly, follows, and my sister does exactly the same. And I'm like, Ashley, what are you doing? She didn't even answer me, she just followed him in, which is not normal. Like I say, she would never, ever, just out of stubbornness. So they went in, and I'm like, well, I'm watching it go, So I'm standing there. So it's been 5 minutes I was out on my own. I called them out. They've been out there for 5 minutes. They've gone in. And I'm just standing there, and I'm just watching it, and I'm, kind of looking at the lights, wondering, just asking it questions mentally, telepathically. If I was like sending it, like, what's going on? Why are you there? What you do? Take me away. I'd even asked it to give me another perspective. I'm bored of it. Come on, continue. As a kid, you're just joking around. I was just looking for something and some logic and some sense. So after another 5, maybe 10 minutes, I was just really I was just looking at it, and then all of a sudden it wasn't there. As clear as I'm looking at you two. I didn't see you move. You're just not there anymore. It's just blank space. I could see the stars. It'd gone cold. It was windier. That stillness. And there was nobody on the street but me. I looked across all the houses. There's no one there. But what I saw was the central bit. Like I said, I couldn't see the circumference of it. But I know that my sister, we discussed it when we went back in. I went back in kind of really just gutted and upset and wound up. But, I didn't see it go. That's where I was there. I just wanted to see it move. And so I went in, and my stepfather, being the joker he was, he said, did you see your UFO go? And I was like, your UFO. I'm like, no, really, you know, I just couldn't make any sense out of it. And my sister, you know, had said that we didn't discuss it. That's the weird thing about all this, is that we didn't discuss it with the neighbours ever again. Nothing was discussed the next day. No one talked. The next morning, or the next, you know, my stepfather got the newspaper, the Evening Post, and I just opened it on a page and went, there's your UFO, and it said satellite out of orbit in big letters, I think. So there's a little story there. Big letters, satellite out of orbit, or satellite, I think it said. And that's what I remember, just big blocks saying satellite. And I was like, yeah, as if, you know. But, you know.
Interesting. Another little interesting thing there she said about her stepfather and her sister sort of being sort of nonplussed by it. They just weren't interested. This was very strange. So what we think that could be a case of a family of a witness being sort of what we call switched off, where, in fact, she said later on that later on her stepfather couldn't even remember it happening, and her sister remembered something about it, but she thought it was a dream. So something very, very strange happened there. And the other interesting point she said was about how, even though it was January, it wasn't cold, and it was still. And then when the craft had disappeared, had gone, it suddenly was cold again. So the environment was being affected there somehow. Very, very strange. So again, that was 2 streets down. She wasn't sure of the exact date at the time, but we worked out from her memory of seeing the newspaper article, it was the same evening. Right. We just saw Phil Jones telling us about his dad's recollection of seeing this craft going across the street. That was 6:15 p.m. He can remember the time exactly because that was the time he normally left to go and pick up a client. But at exactly that time, 3 or 4 miles to the north, something else was happening at exactly the same time. This is Gosainen, a little satellite town to Swansea, and this is Brighton Road, and there's a building on the left called the Gosainen and District Workingmen's Club. And 2 brothers, Milan and Byron Baliak, of Yugoslavian descent, were with a friend called Roger Williams, waiting outside the club to go in to play snooker. And I'm not going to tell you anymore. Let's hear Byron and Milan telling us in their own words.
Well, that night, it was 6:15, we were standing here, and one of our mates from us, so Roger Williams, just looked across the road here, and he screamed out, what's that? And as we looked across here towards the house there was a row of white, bluey lights, very small, and as it came over the top of the house, the whole thing tilted. In between these houses here, we could see a triangle shape, a huge triangle shape. But the only lights we could see then was the shape of the triangle, one at the front and one each side of the other side of the triangle with a red light, not in the centre, towards the front. This thing was floating in this direction, very slow. You could walk fast with it. And we immediately ran over to this side of the road here, and we were actually under it. And well, we were astonished, it was just moving so slow, and went in that direction. When one of the boys, when they went out of sight completely, we watched it for a while till it went out of sight. And when my brother and his mate went in, they phoned Swansea Sound. But while they went in there was 2 smaller triangles in this street here, going up and down, just past each other, like this, but much smaller.
That's why you were inside,
I was
Swansea Sound.
I was here.
Went inside.
These 2 went into Swansea to phone, and I was still out here. I stayed here, and out of nowhere, this street here, there were 2 smaller triangles up and down each other like that till they completely went out of sight. No sound whatsoever. But this thing here was huge. These were smaller. It was really big, wasn't it?
Yeah,
right in front of us here.
I remember, to be honest.
Yeah.
So initially then, the sighting was opposite the club?
Yeah, right here. Right here.
And
Come over that.
What sort of height were they?
What'd you say? Right, another length on top of that house there?
It's awkward to say. I just remember the size of it. Say from here, I reckon one corner would be half the height of this again.
The red brick building.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and going to the point of that one,
Yeah.
and then going over to sort
In
of
that line
centre.
So you're saying it came down from the north then? That way?
That's where I saw it. I didn't see any of others, so it was a huge triangle, sort of from house to house, and in between to the gap.
Yeah.
So it was that size.
And about
But
40, 50 foot up there.
Yeah, twice that. But I couldn't see anything in between it, apart from the lights, and that was it. I looked, but I couldn't see any.
You couldn't see a body?
I couldn't see anything in between it. But it was definitely totally different.
Black helicopter.
They're watching us.
They're on here, yeah.
They're on to us already.
So you went in then to...
No, my brother went in, and Roger went in.
Right.
And as he went in, I stayed here, as it was, they'd gone that way, so I stayed here just having a look around the skies. And then out of nowhere, he just started looking, and it was just there. And it was two smaller triangles going up this street here, down towards there.
Coming up parallel with the road.
Yeah, exactly in a straight line here. And slowly, back and forth, just missing each other like that.
But the first one had gone by then, had it?
First had gone completely. These had gone into phone. And I just stayed, on the nose around, I would look at the skies. And then it was there, just looked that way, and they were there.
Everyone said you couldn't see anything between the first one.
I could just see it was a black shape. It was a black triangle. I could see that. But you couldn't see...
There's definitely a craft there.
Oh, yes, yeah. But you couldn't see how thick or deep or anything it was. You know what I mean? All you could see is those lights, and you could definitely see the really black shape of the triangle. You could see what shape it was. Yeah. But you couldn't see what depth it was. Nothing like that,
So it's... After it came down there, you said you went off to the west.
Straight in that line. Straight down where that car's going. Straight in that line down there.
How did it turn? Did it manoeuvre or did it
Only from when it came over this house here.
Yeah.
It tilted here.
Yeah.
And then you could see it was a triangle shape. You couldn't until it came over there. And it tilted. All those little white lights went off. And it straightened out in between, like Byron said, in between those houses there. And then you could see it was just a light on each point.
What sort of...
Yeah, apologies for the quality of the sound in that. So, but just remember that was happening at the same time as the driving instructor saw his small triangle crossing his street. Now, the next witness is Alan Crocombe. He was 9 years old. A lot of children seeing these things, and this is 3 miles to the east of that last one, and possibly this fellow might have seen the same things that they saw in Glastonbury. But this is the early evening. This is Alan Crocombe, aged 9, and he lived with his grandparents in Ffordd y Brine. And he went out on his own to walk to his cousin's house in Portmead. He'd only been out for a few minutes when something made him look up and back to his left across the road, so it was facing southwest. He saw 2 huge triangular-shaped craft in the sky, moving very slowly in a southeasterly direction. He excitedly ran back home to tell his grandmother, shouting, "There's aliens!" as he ran in. His grandmother came out. It's nice to see there's one person that come out, not believing the kids are seeing things. His grandmother came out to see the object with him, and many other people were out in the street too to watch the objects. The objects were very low and displayed white lights. There was no flashing lights and no noise. They were big, each about the size of a football pitch. And they covered the 4 houses across the road and more besides. One was a little smaller and behind the other. Whether this was because it was further away, Alan could not say. And as the 2 triangles reached a point over Ravenhill Park to the southeast, they seemed to converge together and move out of sight due to the houses blocking their view. Later, Alan discussed it with a friend and was overheard by his uncle, who told him that he too had seen it in Cadlow, which is not far away. He was actually walking along a road with no pavement. It was like a main road. And he heard something come up behind him, and he jumped into the hedge because he thought he was going to get hit by a truck. But when he looked, it was a huge triangle going over. Now, over in a few more miles to the east of that last one was Mark Rayworth, the gentleman on the left-hand side. He was a young lad at the time, and let's hear from him now. Mark, what can you tell us about that night?
I was going walking my friend home. I think it was roughly around 7. I did confirm that with my mother. We just got to the gate there, started walking up, and my mother said, "Look at that." That's what I heard. And we looked up to the sky, and right there was two huge triangles, biggest things I've ever seen. One in front of the other. The left one was in front of the right one, just travelling out to sea very slowly. No noise to them at all. I remember the big white rings underneath them and the lights going off all over them.
So you see there were two triangles?
Two, yeah.
What sort of height were they, Mark?
I would say roughly, and this would be guessing now, but roughly around 500.
Yeah. How old were you at the time?
8.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult for you to remember all the exact details.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you can do your best then. So.
I just remember the size of them.
Yeah.
I'd say if they were down here, I would say they were bigger than 2-foot pitches, easy.
How long were you watching them for? Were they sort of static or
We were here
moving
for about 20 minutes. We were here, roughly.
So they're moving quite slowly then, were they?
They hardly moved. By the time we left, they'd hardly moved. So
And no sound whatsoever?
no sound at all, nothing at all. And it's my mother that said, "Let's go," in the end, because we had to take my friend home.
Yeah.
Because his mother was waiting. So
What were the lighting conditions like? Were the street lights on?
the street lights were coming on. My mother confirmed to me that it was just getting dark. So I thought it was dark, but she confirmed it was just getting dark. It was. And,
Were there any lights displayed on these objects?
yeah, there was a white ring underneath, and there was, I remember, yellow lights, white lights going off all over it. So it's like as if they wanted to be seen.
What was the depth of the craft?
It was deep.
Because the way I imagine it in my mind is
You mean the thickness of the craft?
The thickness, yeah. I wouldn't know the exact thickness, but it was quite deep. But looking at it, they looked shallow, but they weren't, because they were just too big.
So you say they were heading south, yeah?
Yeah. So if that's
so
south.
Lawrence, if you could turn and get a shot of the... If you could get Mark pointing up to exactly where they were in the sky. Right.
Just there.
Okay. Right. Yep.
So looking actually that, so we're looking southeast there, so they'd be heading... Yeah, cut that one off. We're just going to cut that one off because we're running a bit short of time. We have got one more video to show you. Yeah, the two triangles, he said, they're going over the bay. And this, I mentioned this one earlier, June Thomas, she was leaving work. She worked in a factory in the docks. And she saw the two triangles going over the bay, which corroborates what Mark Rayworth just told us there. Okay, next one. Again, we've seen that one before. Let's just skip that one, yeah. Yeah, right. Ken Morse was the next witness. He was sitting at home watching the TV, and all of a sudden the lights went out. Power cut. He looked out of his window to wondering what it was, if it was just his house or whether the local area was blackout as well. And he saw 3 bluey white lights travelling from west to east over his house towards Swansea Bay. And he's located in Bishopston, which is on the South Gower coast. And we've got a short video here. Let's see a little bit what he says there.
Put the TV on, sat down there, and within a matter of minutes, the power went off. Now, this was a fairly regular occurrence up here because at the time we had 3-phase open wires. They used to blow about in the wind and short out, and obviously that was off for a while then. But on this particular night, there was no wind, it was a clear night, and the power went off. So I did what I usually do under those circumstances. I used to get up, look through the window to look at the houses over on Old Way to see whether they still had power on, and if they did, it was just a problem in our lane. But on this particular night, they were off as well. And whilst looking out to the window, my attention was immediately drawn to 3 brilliant bluish white lights forming a triangle that was slowly moving overhead. Now, I knew that from sort of things that I'd read in the past that this was one of the famous black triangles. Not that I could see it was solid, all I could see were the 3 lights. So I dared not take my eyes off it in case anything happened, so I moved over to this end of the window, opened the window frame, and just listened, and there was absolute silence. Now, we're in a very quiet lane, we're quite away from the road, so we're used to not hearing anything.
So if we go to the window, could you point to the exact part of the sky where you saw it?
Yes, okay. So I was sitting there, so I would have just walked up to the window to look at the houses you can see across the village, the other side of the road there, over in Oldray. And normally they've got one or two lights on in their houses there, which I can see from here. Now, on that particular instance, there was nothing visible, and I was probably standing reasonably close to the window when my attention was drawn up to that angle there. So as I was standing here looking out the window to see whether the lights were on over there, I noticed 3 bright white lights in a triangular formation that had just passed over the lane, and the back 2 lights lined up accurately with the run of our guttering there, which to me indicated that it was crossing the lane at 90 degrees. It just carried on very, very slowly over there, and I then moved to open the window to have a listen. And even now you can hear that there's virtually no sound at all. So I watched it from here for a while until it passed over the trees over there and then got fainter and fainter and fainter as it disappeared in the distance over to West Cross and ultimately out over Swansea Bay, presumably.
Okay, so this would have been a west to easterly direction?
A west to east, yeah.
Okay, I don't know whether that experience influenced his choice of wallpaper. I don't know. Did you notice that the clock said almost the same time as the clock up there? Isn't it synchronous? Just to the north, could you see Calais, just up there? The next sighting was a lady called Carol Batcup. She'd just been picked up from work by her husband, and she was returning back home to Dunvant, which is nearby, and they saw 2 huge triangular-shaped objects covered in lights going over along the road, along Gower Road, heading west. And we interviewed her, and she gave us a full account. This is actually a drawing she did for Gary Rowe, a researcher at the time who actually interviewed her, not long after. And she told us also of a friend of hers who saw these 2 objects going over the Gower Peninsula and heading out towards the Bristol Channel, and that would have been about 5 to 6. So that would have been before the driving instructor and before the guys outside the club. So it seems to be lots and lots of objects in different parts of the area, some at different times, some at the same time. And her husband actually told us an interesting point which connects back to Ken Morse, who saw the 3 lights through his living room window. He said that the factory where he works, which is called Alcoa, which is an aluminium factory in Wynarloedd, just to the north of the city. When he went to work the following day, the night shift had said that there'd been a power cut that night. But strangely, instead of the power all going off over the whole factory at the same time, it actually went off from one end of the factory to the other in stages, which, to me, anyway, seems that a lot of UFOs seem to influence electrical systems. We get a lot of power cuts, a lot of cars cutting out. And for something large, influencing a large factory like that, if he was travelling over it slowly, any effect it had would be in stages, wouldn't it? So there was a power cut down in Bishopston, and there was a power cut in Wynarloedd, possibly caused by the same effect. Yeah, I'm just coming to the end now. Yeah, I'm very conscious of that. Time is against us. So, what were these objects? Were they ETs? Were they interdimensional? Were they military? We did a program for the BBC not long ago on the radio and to talk about this case, and BBC, the media, true to form, they get an expert in to give them their opinion. And they consulted an aeronautics engineer who said that at that time, in the mid-80s, the Royal Navy were experimenting with dirigible airships, which would have displayed lights, so that could have confused people. But looking at the testimony of the witnesses here that you've seen today, I don't think any of them mistook an airship For one, airships do make a noise. And they're the wrong shape, for one thing. They're not triangular. So, it's a work in progress. You've just seen a few witnesses that we've managed to track down, and there are many, many more, and we're still finding them. So it's a job in progress, and I hope you've enjoyed a short presentation here today, and thank you for having us.